It's 11:05, so we are going to resume and start again. So welcome to the last session on cultural heritage for intercultural dialogue and peaceful communities. For those who join us again, I'm Ramón Blecua. I work for the Diplomatic Service of the European Union, and I will facilitate this discussion. As for the other session, you will have two parts ahead. The first one will be a 40 minutes discussion with our three panelists, and the second part of interaction while using the dedicated Q&A function. Again, and you know that by heart, the session will be recorded and soon published on our partner channel, the CDPM. This ultimate session will explore the intangible side of cultural heritage, ready to rebuild peaceful societies. And we already have questions, and we already heard about the importance of intangible in the previous session. And here, I just want to use the word of Anna Paolini just a few minutes ago that said cultural heritage, it's not only focusing on monuments. And while it's fragile, intangible cultural heritage, it refers to the wealth of knowledge and skill that are transmitted from one generation to the next one. It's a very important factor to mainstream cultural diversity, interfaith dialogue. And I'm sure you remember what we said during the session yesterday, especially the one on Iraq, to think to people and in conflict or crisis we are going through, and that we can have hope that is still alive. So in a way, understanding intangible cultural heritage of communities will help with intercultural dialogue to foster this mutual respect for other ways of life. This is why intangible cultural heritage, and it would be the objective of the discussion today, might and shall create bridges between the past, the present, and the future. For discussion and to create and to unveil this bridge, I'm really delighted to welcome our three speakers, all with an immense experience. Ramón Blecua, who is Ambassador at Large for Intercultural Dialogue and Mediation from the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have Paolo, VITTI, who is board member of Europa Nostra, and Giovanni Fontana, who is an architect and a senior consultant of the United Nations. But before jumping into the discussion, we will display an introduction video of a project funded by our friends from the British Council Cultural Protection Fund, which is called Rebuilding Life Syrian Stone Masonry. This is a really vivid example of how intangible heritage can directly contribute to fostering peace, rebuilding identities, and promote economic development. Miguel, might you please launch this video?
Years of brutal civil war have ripped Syria apart, with horrific devastation to its historical and archaeological heritage.
Hopeless. No future. Nobody's looking forward for a future. Your biggest hope is just finding food for your kids, whatever.
But now, refugees from the war are coming together to learn an ancient craft, creating something beautiful and lasting out of the toughest of materials. Their hope that one day they could return to their homeland to use the skills of stonemasonry to help rescue their country's shattered heritage and rebuild their broken lives.
Thanks a lot, Miguel. Really interesting video from our friends from the British Council. We have this word of creating something beautiful and lasting, and we have the word of hope. I turn to our speaker, and my first question will be to you, my dear Ramón, Mr. Ambassador. And I remember the first time we met, we had a direct connection, speaking the same language in our diplomatic world. And we know, and it has been reminded during the Iraq session yesterday, that sometimes the diplomats, we do speak a complex language, but basically we're speaking that cultural heritage is an integral part of dialogue and peace. You have a solid and rich experience of senior diplomats in various regions of the world. You were our former ambassador of the European Union to Iraq, and recently you have been appointed by the Spanish government as ambassador at large for intercultural dialogue and mediation. My first question to you is, how can we develop and convince of a need to build a cultural heritage protection diplomacy?
Well, thank you, Guillaume, and very grateful to be invited to this panel. I think this is a really groundbreaking initiative that many of us have been working for and hoping for a long time. There's also a dark secret in my past that I had to add to your description. I'm also a historian by training. So I've always been particularly sensitive to the meaning of cultural heritage, not only from the archaeological point of view, but also from the political point of view, from the impact. Because one of the first things I remember is this feeling that actually writing history is not about understanding the past, it's about designing the future. And I think the High Representative and Vice President Borrell made a very important point when he mentioned that those who attack and destroy the cultural heritage, both material and immaterial, are not doing this just for wanton destruction or just to spite other communities. They're doing this, they're trying to erase this common, this materialization of a common culture, basically to change the future. And I think that is why I would not really emphasize so much protection of cultural heritage. We are not here to protect our heritage. We're here to defend our future, to preserve our future. The future we all can share. So I think for me that gives a much more, much more of a sense of urgency. This is not about, even there was a very beautiful video, the one you show, but what I would really emphasize from that video is not how these people are going to find a job rebuilding old buildings. It's how they are going to rebuild themselves by restoring that heritage. I think the case of Iraq is for me has been obviously a particularly intense experience in the sense that you see that such a rich and complex culture that is based on thousands of years and overlapping cultural traditions that have been materialized in wonderful works of art, but also in the society that Iraq is now, so complex and so different from sometimes our own understanding when we emphasize sectarian separations or sectarian violence, and we don't understand that sometimes the same tribe is half Sunni, half Shia, or sometimes like in Nineveh, a part is Christian, part is Sunni, and that the Iraqi society is basically 38% intermarriages. So somebody may say, I'm a Sunni because they identify with one branch or another of the family, but actually maybe the Sunni father and the Shia mother, or a Kurdish Shia father and a Christian mother. The reason of sectarian violence was not so much from the Iraqi side, but because of the collapse of the state brought after the US intervention and the promotion of sectarian policies, and had more to do actually with Western intervention than with their own personal choices. And let's not forget that Zarqawi, who was the main architect of sectarian violence in the country, was actually Jordanian. So when we put Iraq as an epitome of these sort of divisions, actually I see it as the opposite. It's an example of how so many different cultural traditions and identities can actually blend together, and with a strong sense of Iraqi identity based on this long history. I remember I even used historical points in economic discussions when we're talking about, for example, economic reform, because I was in Ur and I was told by the archaeologists there that they have found the first banking contract ever in history, more than 5,000 years old. So when I was talking to the minister and they were saying how the difficulties of doing financial reform, I said, listen, that you cannot be serious. I mean, you invented it 5,000 years ago. You built the first banking system, and now you are telling me you cannot go ahead with this? And the guy laughed and then stopped saying like, no, this is so difficult, this is impossible, and started thinking, how can I actually do something that that can blend with this? Like when you touch sometimes the sense of the pride that somebody has on its own self, on its own history, it's a completely different thing. It's not anymore you're pushing a Western type of reform on them. It's like you are reminding them, like, just be yourself, do what you have done before. You don't need to really find a different model. So I think that is, for me, an extremely important factor on how heritage and cultural heritage in particular can be extremely relevant in our job, in our work, not just on the cultural dimension of it, but on the political side as well. And certainly in terms of bringing cohesion and bringing a sense of purpose to a community that has been affected by conflict. But I would like also to give another twist to this. And I think we have been used, and sometimes in the language I hear when people talk about cultural heritage as something beautiful that has to be protected. This is as if we are talking about something that is non-productive. It's something that, because, you know, is something old and something beautiful and we have to protect it. But we forget that culture was not always just a decorative element in our lives, as it happened from the 19th century when nothing that was not productive was considered basically decorative. I mean, culture, immaterial, what now we call intangible heritage or whatever, is actually have always a cathartic effect in every society. And something that is often forgotten is that mediation is not just about ideological difference, political problems, economic differences, or fight for resources, sectarian or religious conflicts. There's a lot of emotional problems involved. I have seen a lot of mediation efforts derail or fail because when everything else has been sorted out and when the solutions are on the table, when you have a perfect paper that everybody can agree on, it fails. And it fails because the emotional dimension of the conflict has not been addressed. The emotional element is still there. The mistrust, the lack of, the sense of revenge, the ancient hatreds, family feuds, that basically come down to a very emotional level. The emotional core, at the end of the day, is where conflict resolution has to be based. And that is why building trust is so important. And one of the ways of really doing that is sharing a cultural experience. So I do think that we should not only look at the heritage in a passive sense, but as an active element, as an element of transformation. And I think there is that potential that has to be incorporated into our practice. As mediators, as conflict resolution actors, we need to understand that. We need to feel that, to be able to also make others and make those who we are working with share and understand it. So I believe that this double aspect gives this cultural heritage component a very powerful and very important role as one of our instruments. And I leave it there, so probably we'll have time to
many thanks, Ramon. No. What I keep from your word is really this designing the future together with a dialogue, with a mediation. And you really provide a very interesting living point of view that anchored it in the life of a people and building a future together and having a perspective. So really thanks for your word. You also speak of its political meanings, and in just in 2 minutes, the time that rests to us, if you can phrase on this political meaning, what kind of perspective can we have? Because you work from Spain, from a very important member state of the European Union. So really in 2 minutes, what are the next steps in terms of dialogue and mediation that you foresee? And after, I know you have a great announcement that you already a bit unveiled during the break. So really in a short 2 minutes perspective from our member state and European Union in dialogue.
Well, Spain, coming from Spain gives you two different angles. One is, yes, we can say we come from a multicultural society. We are, and we still remain the example where, you know, Judaism, Islam and Christianity produce some of the most incredible and extraordinary intellectual products and works of art. And this is in our everyday life, is in our cities. And I think that gives us a certain perspective. For us, it's something alive. We live with it, but at the same time, we have a difficult history behind us, in which those very different from being an element of, let's say, a positive element, they've been the source of conflict and discrimination. So we have seen both sides of the coin. We have lived through them, and the effect that this discriminating or inflicting violence or suffering on others because they are different or feel different or believe in something different, what can that bring? And it can bring nothing but conflict and nothing but suffering. So, but that feeling that is so much alive also bring us, I think, able to have this empathy to others that are in the same circumstances and share. I mean, I don't think we can give lessons to anybody because we have done terrible things, as bad as anybody else, but we can share that experience, and that the fact of what we have done with it now, I think, is a very positive example. And so I think we can bring this into the European, let's say, compact as one additional element, especially for the cultures of the Mediterranean and the Arab world and all that. There is a particular important chord that resonates. That's why I wanted to, and you were talking about the announcement. Yes, I wanted to launch or present this proposal to have a conference in Toledo. Toledo was called the capital of the three cultures, and that's the way the king of Toledo actually signed himself. And he was the one who created the School of Translators, where Hebrew, Arabic, and Latin translators would create one of the largest corpus of translations that was the base for the European Renaissance later on. And texts were translated from Persian, from Hebrew, from Arabic into Latin, and then distributed all over Europe in the 12th century. So I think that is why that for me is a good place on which to really also start rebuilding and building on this concept. And yes, as you well said, all this is about the future. I think we have to stop thinking of heritage looking backwards. This is not about restoring something to this pristine character or beauty. This is basically about ourselves and how we rebuild ourselves, how we grow into more complete human beings and able to accept differences and others in a very different way. So, and I think Toledo has this extremely powerful symbolic, when we had recently a track 2 with some Mediterranean Arab country in conflict, and they were going through, they had their hotel in the Jewish quarter, they were having events in the cathedral, and then they were visiting the old mosques in the city. You could feel how that whole physical walk actually meant much more than that, and it was a whole walking time. So I think that is basically what I would like to propose as a next step.
Thanks.
Keep building on your great initiative.
Thanks a lot, Ramón. Really appreciated that the initiative we have done today will keep being alive in this amazing city of Toledo, like you mentioned. I really like the perspective that you bring is for us, and it's really relevant today, and we discussed a lot of time. It's to share the experience. We and as diplomats, we have to share the experience and not to teach to others how to do so. Really, thank you very much for bringing that with the objective to have a common future together. So thanks a lot to bring.
One point, just a very short, to yes. 1 minute point, because I remember when I was listening to Anna Paolini and to Luis Haxhausen, with both of them, I worked on the field both in Yemen and Iraq, and they can still testify how difficult it was at the time to put together a project in which the words cultural heritage was included, and we had to frame our project as job creation using cultural heritage or community cohesion, but the word itself was not really something we could use, because it would immediately bring the project like in a difficult light. And now the fact that we have this conference and that the External Action Service is bringing this point as one of relevant in the new concept note of the mediation efforts and conflict resolution, I think is a tremendous step forward. And thank you for that. Thanks,
Ramón, for your words. I would like not to turn to Paolo after having heard the words of Ramón to really anchor cultural heritage, that it be intangible or tangible in the future. The last time we physically met, Paolo, it was thanks to our Croatian friends in Dubrovnik. And here, like Toledo, we have an amazing example of a city that really shows that how rebuilding heritage was decisive to bring peace and reconciliation. And here in Dubrovnik, we discussed the project you were leading with UNDP on a strategy of reconciliation in Palestine. And reconciliation is also a part of this intangible heritage of dialogue, of mediation. So my first question to you is how can reconciliation and its link to cultural heritage be a key element for peace and development? Paolo, you're muted. We unfortunately can't hear you.
Okay, so I share this image. So thank you all. I have to say that Ramón gave a very forceful message, and the power of cultural heritage as a healing agent is absolutely outstanding. And I think that we all agree. All of us, all who are here in this conference, agree on that point. But now the point is how to make that wider, because we know that very well that cultural heritage still is not strong enough. And we know that cultural heritage is what builds identities. So I'm going to thank you for your question. And my experience in Palestine was a very meaningful for me, for understanding one of the many aspects of cultural heritage. This project actually was born as a support to the development of cultural heritage and tourism in Palestine. And there is this background of intervening, as we were saying, that you intervene on cultural heritage for tourism, to develop tourism. But, and this may be not the correct approach. I mean that one of the components could be definitely the one of the tourism. And the EU, this is a EU-funded project conducted by UNDP in Palestine. And the main focus, this was part of a package of 10 million euro interventions, was to find some sites in a territory that, as you know, is facing huge challenges, and people are facing huge challenges. So the experience was meaningful from the fact that we understood during the process of this project that we had to move to considering this project as part of a policy making in Palestine on cultural heritage. And this was possible through different steps. I will start for the first steps, which was the rehabilitation of this amazing site in the desert close to Jericho. And the first thing that we achieved that I think that was particularly meaningful is that we succeeded to bring together all the stakeholders, but also all the people working into the site, understanding the true significance of the site, not as a physical a repository of architecture, but as a repository of identities of the past. So we succeeded shifting the focus from the building to the significance of the building. This is an important site because it's considered to be for the Muslims as the place where the Prophet Moses is buried. So it's something that was at this stage was shifting to understand that we had to work on the significance of the site. And this significance of the site was meaningful because through that we could build together the values that of the community. So now we have to do, as we said, a constructive criticism to the approach of investing for tourism. If we understood clearly at a certain stage that we had to focus in the way we will involve the Palestinians, the people, the community, their values into this site. And at this point, one of the focusing point, and we are at this stage, is to change the approach, to have a stronger grassroots approach, is a stronger involvement of the Palestinian community. I always say, as an international expert, I feel always a little bit uncomfortable because these places belong to the people, and I go there in some way to spread from outside, and I don't have all the intensity of the values of the site. So it's important to have this grassroots approach. And for this reason, we understood that we could widen the approach by enlarging the spectrum of the intervention. This is close to Jericho. Jericho, as you know, is an impressive site, which has layering, which is intercultural in itself. The archaeology, but the Islamic archaeology also, not the only of course, the prehistoric or the one of the period of Herod, the Hellenistic and Roman times. You have, of course, synagogues. You have environment, you have water. Jericho is there because there is a lot of water. You go to Jericho today and you don't see water. There is no water. So the idea is to work on the site of Jericho, but not in the concept of rehabilitation, restoration, but in identifying in which way local people can contribute to return to the sites. You go to the sites and there is no local person that is sharing and understanding. So there is a problem of education, awareness raising, of involvement of the community. So it's a matter of sharing the intercultural values that there are on the site, and there is a matter of working much more on the people. So I think that the players in Palestine have to be the people, and there are so many NGOs that are doing great work there, and they should be more involved into the decision-making of the strategies on cultural heritage in Palestine. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Paolo. Really praise your word, and I know that your colleagues that work with you on Palestine on the project or with us today, and might comment, go and use the chat if they want to provide their really valuable experience. What I keep from you is you're right, this complex approach, but the importance of tangible heritage and how to make it whole, strong, and alive. So I think it's a really interesting experience that you bring to the floor. Allow me now maybe to switch a bit from Palestine, and you're also a board member of Europa Nostra. The scope usually is mainly Europe, but I know that there are some experience cooking and to try to go in the neighborhood, and mainly the European Union neighborhood, and to bring some dialogue projects. So maybe you might build and explain us a bit of the dialogue project, of the cultural heritage projects you have, and the potential engagements we may have with this part of the world, which is very close, the European neighborhood, really important for us too.
One of the things that maybe has not come out in this conference and that should be really considered is we are in Europe, but which is actually the identity of Europe and the Mediterranean. So we are discussing of the East, and we are forgetting that the Mediterranean is a whole. You have it extends from north to south, from east to west, and embraces all these different cultures. So the dialogue with other cultures for Europa Nostra, of course, is very important. Europa Nostra, as you know, extends at present the action in the Council of Europe countries, that 47 countries, including, of course, Russia, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, and Turkey, but is missing the Mediterranean as a whole. And when you touch the Mediterranean as a whole, you cannot not consider the Middle East, which is strictly connected. I mean, I have been working as an historian in the last years on some influences that there are in history of architecture. For instance, the lighthouse of Alexandria, how it is connected to the minarets of Western Islam, Seville, Rabat, and Marrakesh. Or how, for instance, the building techniques of vaulting that developed in Spain in the Middle Ages were actually coming from Iran and Persia. So it's kind of, and I'm talking about architecture, which is my field, but this, of course, it can spread in at any level. Not to say that Italy, of course, was in the Middle Ages, had Longobards, has Normans, but have Byzantines and have Arabs that all together influence what we are today Italians. So it's a kind of layering. So Europa Nostra wants to spread this idea and spread, especially, I will quote Zneska Mihailovic, our Secretary General, who said we have to change cultural heritage from being a sector to become a vector. So something that really can help to bring together these identities. So we don't need anymore to talk about national heritage, national vision, but we have to talk about our shared heritage. In the moment we change from national to shared, and the word shared has come out in this conference many times, we really understand that you are changing the approach to the whole thing. One last thing, just to say that now we consider in Europa Nostra very, very important the point of education, and this is a topic that came out. We talk about hope. The Council of Europe HOPE project is about history teaching observatory of peace. This is a very important component because in the way writing about history is shaping the future, Ramon. Yes, you are right. And it's the right way to approach the understanding of this history, our shared history. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Paolo. I really praise this image, and thanks to you and to Sneska, from a sector to a vector. And I think you really well highlighted for the Mediterranean. And I guess that the four of us, Ramon, Giovanni, you and myself, we are born on the shore of the Mediterranean Sea. So for us, it has a clear meaning, and I'm sure it's really important, this question of connection, future, sharing. So I think it's really important, and thanks a lot for sharing your experience with us. I would like to turn to you now, Giovanni. You were part of a team that drove the report of the European Union in Iraq and MENA that we discussed yesterday. You have extensive experience of architect, and especially with UNESCO in Iraq. Based on all your experience, and after having heard Ramon and Paolo providing really strong words on dialogue, on mediation, hope, and future, I would like to hear from you on the substance of intangible cultural heritage. And my first question is, what is the overall complementarity you've seen between the tangible part and the intangible heritage, and how we can try to bridge the gap between them?
Thank you very much, Guillaume. First of all, I thank you everyone and the large participation in this conference. Thank you to the organizers. It is so far a great success. And thank you for the question. Although I'm an architect by training and devoted my entire career to the safeguarding of cultural heritage in its physical and tangible assets, especially with a minor component dedicated to intangible cultural heritage, I accepted this challenge today as one of the contributors of the report that was considered as an input for this conference, because I think it's very key and important to discuss the relations and the complementarity between tangible and intangible heritage, and particularly in the context of conflict and post-conflict situations, because I believe that this subject must be further investigated in the future, and especially I really encourage the European Union to take a more, say, a more effective and engaged action towards policies and programs in this sector. Too often, we forget that cities, living or dead, are and were made of people, and that it is the people who make the city. William Shakespeare, in his Coriolanus, writes, "What is the city but the people?" And Bertolt Brecht, in the aftermath of the Second World War, which I'm linking the city to the conflict here, echoes Shakespeare's hero with, "What are cities built without the wisdom of people?" And we can certainly agree that the wisdom of people is the practices, representations, expressions, knowledge, and skills, as well as the instruments, objects, artifacts, and cultural spaces associated therewith, that communities, groups, and in some cases individuals recognize as part of the cultural heritage. Well, what I just read and quoted is the Article 2 of the Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Heritage, or Cultural Heritage, also known as the 2003 Convention, one of the 6 main international conventions that UNESCO is governing. The Article 2 also continues in its paragraph 1, naming or mentioning a number of different domains, and this is the word terminology used by the convention, different domains that are, for instance, oral traditions and expressions, performing arts, social practices, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, and traditional craftsmanship. Well, yesterday in this conference, I heard His Excellency Martin Hoot, the EU ambassador to Iraq, I guess the successor of Ramón Blecua, who's with us right now, making reference to some of those intangible heritage domains in Iraq with a view to their protection. And these are really excellent news, because during my the period I was working in Iraq for UNESCO, we were not really able to address the importance of intangible heritage, because the damage and loss that was prevailing in the country was really overwhelming and occupying the whole cultural scene. Talking about the tangible heritage, the historic towns, historic buildings, and so forth. But also yesterday, and this is quite interesting, I could witness the testimony with an image, quite a strong image, of Tenente Colonnello Alfio Gullotta, if I'm not mistaken, from the Carabinieri, showing a red rosary left on a statue of a Madonna, rescued, or being rescued actually, from a church which collapsed after the earthquake that shook central Italy in 2016. I think in Amatrice, or in that neighborhood, in that village. Well, in the case of a natural disaster, but more even relevant in the case of a conflict, the so-called associated values, the 2003 Convention is mentioning them, to heritage, tangible or intangible, become really critical. So one of the issues is really how to bridge the gaps between the tangible and intangible, and what are the perspectives to concrete actions that we can work on in this sense. Well, I would like to launch an idea now, maybe for the debate that will follow this discussion, this panel. Well, there is no, in my opinion, there is no heritage safeguarding if we only consider the tangible heritage, the brick and mortar, as we say in English. So historic buildings, old cities, archaeological sites, cultural landscapes, and so forth. Or also the intangible movable heritage, which are the museums, collections, libraries of manuscripts, and so forth. And therefore, we disregard the intangible aspects of the same heritage. Since cultural heritage is an intellectual, historical, social, and political construction, I mean, Ramón Blecua had a terrific start of this session, reminding us as we should start considering heritage really a projection of our future instead of the memory or nostalgia of our past. Well, these well-defined concepts that are normally defined by experts, and here I would like to remind that usually those definitions are born within Western expertise, Western societies, which is, we cannot even deny that is working now in a post-colonial scenario. Well, those categories, it is paramount to consider them within their own setting, their own community setting. In particular, it is very important to understand how those categories passes through the acceptance of the intangible associated values to X or Y site. We can use Nabi Musa portrayed by Paolo a few minutes ago, which is a site that I know very well since I worked for 10 years in Palestine. And therefore, well, give to those values a key role in the safeguarding at both policy and practice levels. And this is even more true, I repeat myself probably a little bit, but it is even more true in times of conflict. Conflict of disasters, the Madonna shown yesterday, it is quite a vivid image that I think I will keep in my mind for some time. But we also have to consider that conflicts not necessarily target the intangible heritage domains as defined by the convention. I would say a bit provocatively that a piece of traditional music will survive a war much better than a fortified tower or fortified citadel. But during the conflict or in its immediate aftermath, buildings or sites that the community was not particularly attached to become, by miracle, sometimes the quintessence of their identity, the raison d'etre of the community, because they go through a process of signification and symbolization, also and especially when they are threatened, destroyed, or badly damaged. I give an example to conclude, which is quite evident. Some people may remember that at the beginning of the occupation of Mosul in 2014, in June 2014, the Al-Hadba minaret, which is now being restored through a project that I had the pleasure to contribute to. Well, when ISIL militia people threatened to demolish it at the very beginning, only because the minaret is situated close to two tombs that are not even directly connected to the minaret. Well, the community, the people of the neighborhood, of the central neighborhood of historic Mosul, well, they created human shield. They created a belt, a human belt around the building to protect it. And this is telling you really how conflict in certain cases is really reinvigorating the sense of belonging. And this happens during, but also after the conflict. In Mosul, we are now witnessing the revival of traditional music, for instance. Mosul has been a city very well known for its traditional music and other cultural expression like books, another intangible heritage domains. Well, now traditional music is now flourishing again in Mosul. There are music groups made by youth that were not existing before the occupation. So we, again, closing, again, blinking to Ramon's start of this session. Well, this is really a good lesson for the future, using our heritage for designing the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Giovanni, for sharing with us. I propose we will move to the Q&A so that we have a lot of really interesting questions and you tackle a lot of subjects, Giovanni. And what I retain, and linking to the beginning of what you said, you bring together music and theater, and you manage to together Shakespeare and Brecht with really this dialectical theater of questioning the wisdom and the wish of people in the city. And I think it's really important, and it's come from all of your presentation. People, hope, local involvement. We touch base, and it's a really first question we have, and it's really for the three of you. We touch base with theater, the music with you, Giovanni, at the end. We touch base with tourism. There is a question of education too, which is really linked to cultural heritage. We have seen in the previous session with Anna Paolini from UNESCO projects with youth. And my question is really to you. And I remember in France, we used to have describing the history, the La Guerre des Michards, if you know a bit the history of France. And that was a book of reference for my parents, grandparents, everybody. How can we teach, not the history, but how can we go through education with cultural heritage? It's quite a complex question to tackle, but I guess it's really important to raise this issue of education and to bring back the youth. So quite complex question, but I don't know who want for sure the three of you might have a lot to. Paolo, I saw you unmute first, please.
Yeah, I can break the ground. I mean that education and cultural heritage can be approached on many levels, many levels. Personally, I can bring my understanding and my experience as an architect again. I'm sorry for that. But for me, when you look at a building, the building is not stones. The building, an historical building, expresses something that was in the mind of the people who built that the building itself. So but it's not easy to look at a building and understand the building. And a building suddenly becomes the opportunity to teach, to say, to rediscover the layers that are behind the building. The building at Nabi Musa is an impressive building, which has an incredible layering, which goes back to the 13th century, which really can display many levels element. One of the elements I was insisting, and I insist on, that built heritage is at present a possible model for developing a sustainable future. And I'm referring to the issue of climate change and the way it is showing that we have to change the approach to the use of materials, to the use of the sources we have for energy sources. And cultural heritage is teaching us a lot of things. So now when you go to Palestine and everything is concrete, anything, the urban development is a sprawl of buildings with no space. And this links very well to the previous panel where we were talking about the historic city. So you understand that historical heritage, depending on how you display this layering and the significance, can become a very powerful tool to shape our future.
Thanks a lot, Paolo. Ramón.
Can I chip in? Because I think what Paolo just said is very important, and I agree. I mean, listen, I think we are all talking about very significant things, and I really appreciate what the other colleague panelists have been saying, but I think we have to dig deeper. I think when you're talking about education and you're talking about the way cultural heritage should be somehow included in it, I think what there has to be is a change of paradigm. What we are looking at, and I think now that COVID has shaken our, let's say, absolute faith, our irrational faith in endless progress based on permanent economic accumulation as a way of guaranteeing our survival and our well-being, I think we have to understand that the whole education system has been geared into these productive activities, what is considered productive or what is not considered productive, something that will change probably in a few years, and everything that was considered very productive will be absolutely useless. And the question is that when we are sometimes, we are looking at in isolation to environmental issues, to cultural heritage issues, and to a shift also in, for example, gender perspectives and other things. We look at each issue as separate, but they're all connected. They're all connected to the productive system, to the way wealth and value are created and they are given to certain things. And that is also one of the reasons that has certainly increased the level of conflict and, you know, fight for resources and all that stuff. But it's not the only truth. It's because also people have lost the perception of the value. I think Oscar Wilde used to say something, one of his many interesting sayings is that, you know, there's a lot of people that know the price of everything and the value of nothing. So I think we know the price of things, but we have forgotten the value of most of them. So what you have to change is the way, is not put cultural heritage into an education system that's still geared in a completely different direction. Whatever is not productive is not, doesn't have a value only as you know, what is considered useless knowledge. And I lived through the whole process in which humanities were basically scrapped from the curriculum from most of the education because they were considered basically a waste of time. I still remember when my parents were extremely disappointed and when I decided to study history, saying that I was going to ruin my life and become like probably nothing. I will never be able to do anything significant. I mean, this is a mindset. It's not about education. The education is the product of that mindset. What you have to change is that mindset, in which, I mean, and then everything is connected in it. You know, sorry.
No, Ramon, we can hear you.
Oh, I thought I lost the connection. No, so what I mean is everything is connected. You know, when you're looking about how we are basically disregarding the environment, how the role of women has been also neglected in many of these different aspects, how the importance of culture is only relevant when you have an art market. And that's why contemporary art has made extraordinary progress, and why a curator in a modern exhibition gets paid huge amounts of money, while any other cultural performer doesn't, because you have an art market, because you add value to it, because you can make business and money and invest into it. So what we need is a shift, is a mind shift. It's not, the education will come naturally. I mean, like in Spain, people, the best flamenco performers, they don't go to school to learn. They learn it from their own traditions. The same thing happens in theater and in many celebrations that have to do with the intangible heritage that Giovanni was talking about. I mean, that is something that is never learned or is never taught in a formal educational setting, because the educational setting has been shifted away. Sorry, and I will talk too much, so let me finish.
Thanks a lot, Ramon. No, it's really interesting to share. We have a lot of questions. I saw that in the Q&A. We will try to address the most of them, but sorry if we missed so many questions. We have two really interesting questions in the chat from Christian Vasily that posed the question, and Mrs. Svitala Fomenko, the Deputy Minister of Cultural and Information Policy of Ukraine, they're quite linked. The question from Christian is, how can the average citizen contribute to the preservation of its heritage in a country? And the question from Ms. Fomenko is quite similar. It's how can peaceful communities protect their heritage, but with a targeted group, especially intangible in conflict area when they're in minority or persecuted. So the question is really linked to the people with a focus of conflict when there is persecution. Who would like to comment on that? Maybe Giovanni.
Yes, thank you. Well, this is one of the really the real challenges. Well, I took a note yesterday when I was preparing my presentation, also about the bureaucratic level of this sector, which is until now is not a vector, but it's still a sector. And unfortunately, there is a lot of work done at the level of governments or non-governmental organizations, but I still personally see that there is a long way to really reach out to the communities. The communities are very active, especially in the field of intangible heritage, either because it can be performed traditionally, as Ramon was saying, the flamenco dancers learn traditionally in their communities, but also let's consider, for instance, the entire continent of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, where traditions are very strong. They continue from generation to generations, regardless of the normative action or setting that we can think. But it is true at the same time that there is a gap, and I think we should demote, and the European Union can have an important role in that, also because its presence is really everywhere in each country of the world, or almost in each country of the world, through projects and actions that can be more, let's say, close to the communities. So removing a number of filters, removing a number of layers that really create a gap, which sometimes in many situations, for instance, is linguistic, is the language. I would like to to remind that languages are dying on a daily basis in the world. Languages once, I remember when I joined UNESCO in 1998, for my first briefing, we have a 1-week briefing meeting different sectors in UNESCO. I was taken at one point to a small office where there was a gentleman, I think from East Europe, if I remember well, who was in charge of languages, or languages that are disappearing, etc. Well, languages are not anymore, or almost not anymore, in the first interest of UNESCO right now. But languages are the first level of understanding, and therefore of communication, sharing of any type of heritage. I had the chance to work in the last 15 years in the Arabic region, in the Arab region, Arabic countries. And Arabic as a language, which I don't master, but I had the chance to use a little bit in a number of meetings and during my work. Well, for the very little knowledge of Arabic I have, for instance, the same word turath, which is heritage in Arabic, it does not have the same meaning of what we consider heritage or patrimoine or patrimonio in our European languages. It has a completely different understanding or meaning, and it refers specifically to a very specific period, which is from the early Islam to the Abbasid period. So it's a very Islamic, refers to an Islamic heritage, specific heritage, but it is used erroneously, in my opinion, to define all types of heritage. And the Arab people, although they start using this terminology because this is the only one they have to accept, they are somehow misled. And one thing is talking to a professor of an institution, to a cultural expert, etc. And another completely different level is talking to the local community in their own setting. And imagine this difficulty, if in Arabic is already there, when you go to let's say Central Africa or any other regions of the world which are much more remote, where linguistic barriers are really an issue. Thank you.
If I may, Guillaume,
Paolo.
I think that the question about the contribution of every citizen in the preservation of cultural heritage is a very good one. And the answer may be as simple as saying that cultural heritage can be preserved if it is used and respected. So with tangible or intangible, but is just a matter of using and respecting cultural heritage. And if you do that, you see that you contribute very well to its preservation.
Thanks for this really wise word, Paolo, of used, respected, and it implies everybody, basically. Maybe, Ramon, you want to comment on it? I know it's really close to your heart of the implication of people and local people.
So, sorry, Guillaume, when you're talking the implication of local people, what are you pointing at? What do you want exactly me to comment on?
No, just if you have comments after Paolo and Giovanni of the question of how we can involve the people, and especially with a focus on and I know from Iraq on the communities when we are in a conflict and crisis, so on how we can help some dedicated community under pressure to try to safeguard it.
Well, I think it is a delicate matter. Of course, you need, I mean, as we have said, the ownership, the local ownership, the involvement of the different actors. I mean, and when you're working in an environment like that one, like Iraq, you have to certainly be careful to bring everybody in, the local community, but also there's local security actors, there's non-state actors, there are militias, there are different players that you need not necessarily to get involved in your project, but certainly make sure that they don't become spoilers, so they don't consider that what you are doing is going to be or cause them some significant problem, because then you will get backlash. I think how you get people involved is when you actually listen to them and try to understand what it means for them, what you are about to do. Very often we come with the best intentions, and sometimes it's something that has to do obviously with our mindset, with our sometimes Western sense that we know better and we are going to help. So if we know better and we are going to help, they should do what we say. And even sometimes when we listen, but because we want to be confirmed in what we actually think. So I think there's a small shift that makes a big difference when you are dealing with people that are from other cultures, from other communities, from other background. So I don't have a recipe. I think it's all a matter of being sensitive to the way other people think that may be very different. Maybe their priorities are different. Maybe, the problem is when we present our projects and you bring in the money and the funding, you already have an idea of what you want. And when you consult the local community, sometimes it's just a matter of procedure, not necessarily something that's going to change your concept. I think we have to change the approach, because I remember when I was cultural counselor in Cairo, and I didn't have much, really a lot of budget, but I tried to start projects that were actually relevant or important for the partners I'm going to work with. Maybe because I didn't have so much money, I was not, so pushy in terms of my own ideas. But I realized that when people were actually doing things that were significant for them, they will work much harder. They will do much more. You don't need to really try and get them involved or push them or motivate them. I mean, they're the ones who come after you, who really want you to go with them, and they want your assistance. They want to work together. But that is when you certainly put their priorities at the front. And the problem is very often we do the opposite. So my only answer to that is like we need to be a little more humble and realize that the people we are trying to help, they know what is good for them. Maybe they don't know how to do it, or they may have a problem on solving their own internal community issues and the divisions, and there are a lot of internal problems in which you can help to, and that is where mediation also comes in terms of, I believe that our cooperation projects should be linked to local mediation initiatives, not be separate. We are sometimes doing development issues on one side and then working on the big political picture separate from that. I think we have to sometimes go down in mediation to the local level. And I think the European Union, that invests so much money in development projects at the local level, should include mediation initiatives as part of them, because it really changes completely the way the local actors sometimes become engaged in the projects.
Thanks a lot, Ramon, for highlighting the efforts that the European Union is doing with mediation, which is a very, very important tool of our what we call toolbox of external relation. We will go till 20 to respect the timing we have, as we begin at 11:05. We have an ultimate, really interesting question, and the point was raised. Ramon, you mentioned the environment, the climate, saying all was connected, and Paolo and Giovanni, for sure, you mentioned Jericho with the question of natural resources, and you're right, there is no water on that. And we have a question from Lila Infelice of Bologna on natural heritage. And she said, do you think that also the natural heritage surrounding archaeological site and abroad, the overall natural heritage must or might be part of a strategy for cultural heritage protection. Another question is really connected to that. Can we integrate natural heritage with a cultural heritage in order to build a big protective system of heritage for the people? So I don't know who want to take the question. Giovanni for natural heritage.
Well, thank you very much, Guillaume. Thank you for the question. Well, the relation between natural and cultural heritage is another layer of complexity, of course. You might know well that usually, I mean, governments have different ministries or departments that are in charge of the different things. Minister of Environment usually, and Minister of Culture or Antiquities in the other domain. Well, there is a very well-known precedent in that sense, which is actually the 1972 convention, the World Heritage Convention, which is gathering together natural and cultural heritage. But the experience proved that it is quite difficult to really harmonize these two types of heritage because of a number of differences that are really embedded in the nature of these two heritage. Another thing, of course, as the question was referring to, is to consider the protection around certain sites. I mean, Paolo was mentioning several times Jericho. I mean, I worked in Jericho for many years, and I remember very well when we were working on the protection of one of the most important Umayyad sites, the Hirbet el-Mafjar or Ishan's Palace, as many people know with this name. Well, Ishan's Palace is a ruined palace from the first dynasty of the Umayyads in the 8th century AD, and it is surrounded by a beautiful landscape. Well, we really tried hard to convince the government to also protect that landscape. But for instance, I'll give you this as an example. A few years later, we saw the construction of a number of, if I'm not mistaken, military installations and barracks or police, let's say, national security installations, really on the top of the hills. That is the natural scenery behind the best view of the palace. So, of course, it is very much important to protect these assets, but at the same time, especially in certain areas, is very challenging. I worked extensively, allow me to mention this also, this case. I worked extensively also in Palestine on a valley, on an area or a system of valleys, trying to promote the concept of protection of landscape, in particular cultural landscapes, where the work of humans is really superimposed to the work of nature. It was a successful experience, very challenging. It lasted for about 10 years, but it was quite a unique case. Generally, the land in certain areas is considered just as a land for new construction and expansion for the cities. I hope I answered the question, but it's definitely very important and key to work more in that sector. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Giovanni. On these 2 minutes remaining, Paolo, I saw you wanted to add something on natural heritage.
On the natural and landscape, it's something that is so much connected to climate change that it's clearly that we understand that the approach that has been suggested and imposed in some way in some countries is totally unfocused, and so cultural heritage gives more than extraordinary examples of better approaches to the use of natural resources and natural landscape. And the problem of Palestine and the West Bank actually is that, as you know, there is a struggle to have ownership of land in a situation of conflict, actually, because the situation is really very still very sharp in tension. So I would say that. My final comment. I mean that all these panels were very interesting. One thing I would go back to something that was discussed by Valérie Frelon yesterday, by Alif, and one suggestion to the EU is to take into consideration more cultural heritage, and the second one is to use more the organizations, because the organizations move more with less bureaucracy, have strong networks, and connect with people. So this will be my final message.
Thanks a lot, Paolo. By caring of balancing, Ramon, if you have 2 keywords before we can wrap up the session, floor is yours.
Well, my only comment will be there is a lot of interest in leads that we are starting, but of course, little time, and these matters will need further, I think, discussion. It will be great if you have some sort of forum or something. You set up some way, like we continue the discussions and the exchange for those interested after we finish, after the conference is over, because it's a pity that all these things will be diluted if we have no continuity.
And it's an excellent transition. Thanks, Ramon, to mention that. Sorry, we did not manage to pose all the questions you have for the Q&A. This was a very, very interesting session, and I want to thank all of you, really, Paolo, Giovanni, and Ramon, for this interesting value. Discussion might continue. You still have the internet website available, and you have our email address. So if you have any comments, any question, write to us, drop us a line. We will liaise all together and with the speakers. It's valid for all the session we have. Really use it, because I know it's online, it's limited, it's a real challenge, but I guess we had really fruitful debates, so do not hesitate to continue the discussion with us. Allow me just to conclude, and I like the way Damien concluded, to have just 3 words. I get your point, Paolo, on the more, and I totally agree. 3 words to wrap up this amazing session we have on intangible heritage, I guess, is dialogue, people, and future. And these 3 words that we may have a lot of us, but that synthesize the discussion we have. And I really want to thank all of you, Paolo, Giovanni, and Ramon, for the excellent debates we have today. Too short, but excellent. So thanks a lot to all of you.
And Guillaume, if somebody's interested in continued discussion on any of the points, feel free to please give them my email. And if they want to continue, I will be happy to exchange.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ramon.
Okay, thank you.
My dear friends, the session is now over. We will now move to the conclusive session. We are a bit late on the planning. Really sorry for that, but I guess the exchange were really of interest on this intangible heritage part. I will let the floor now to my colleague Damien, that will facilitate the concluding session. Damien, floor is now yours.